The NFL's going on the rails with the crazy trades. We'll tell you which trades could impact your DFS picks this week, and we'll talk about the group of listeners who have got a shot to #win Devin's money. It's a spooky Halloween episode of the Footballguys Daily Fantasy Power Grid. I'm Austin Lee, and I'm joined, as always, by John Lee, Devin Knotts, and Ryan Hester.
Did you lose a bet that we just didn't know about or something?
No, I got, I had this huge stash of wigs from last year's Roto-Grinders show, and I needed to find an excuse to use it. I'm surprised John didn't pull all of his out for Halloween. It just seemed appropriate.
Can we talk about some football, please?
Definitely. During the next hour, we're going to get you ready for the Week 8 main slate on DraftKings and FanDuel. But first, we're going to talk about the Vegas odds and sort of the general landscape that their spreads and game totals sort of paint for us. John Lee, tell us, what are you seeing this week?
Lots of home favorites and high-scoring totals. We've got on the Vegas value charts this week, I do them 1, 2, and 3-star matchups, and there are 4 3-star matchups. I think is probably the highest for the main slate. You got the Rams at home against Green Bay, Kansas City at home against Denver, Cincinnati at home against Tampa Bay, and the Steelers hosting the Browns, all of whom have 28 points or more in terms of their implied team totals. So there's a lot of high-scoring games this week, and there's not a whole lot in at the lower end of the scale, which is somewhat unusual, especially compared to last week. I think there might be some with these games like LA Rams and Green Bay. It's a 9-point spread as of Thursday night. And you got to think that is it interesting to take a guy like Aaron Rodgers as a 9-point underdog? We know he's got the capacity to throw the ball quite a bit. I feel pretty comfortable with that. I'm just not so sure about maybe taking Denver in the same spot, rolling with Case Keenum or even Sam Darnold as a 7.5-point underdog. So we got a lot to talk about tonight, but Vegas is really bringing it home with some high totals.
Yeah, and Green Bay's coming off that bye with some healthy receivers. We'll talk about that in the receivers section. But first, we're going to talk quarterbacks. Devin, who you like at quarterback this week?
Well, a couple guys, and then we're just going to go with it. My favorite guy of the week is Eli Manning.
Eli Manning.
Eli Manning. So he's not going to score the most points in the fantasy week, but we're going to talk about this entire show about how you need to save money.
Okay.
And we're going to try and I'm trying to fit Todd Gurley into my lineups. And
cash game lineups?
Cash both.
Oh, okay. Just checking.
And I want James Conner, and we'll talk about running backs in a little bit. But to do that on FanDuel and DraftKings, he's 4,900 on DraftKings, 6,700 on FanDuel. The reason I like Eli Manning is a couple reasons. The first is if this is contingent, we're recording this on Thursday, if Quentin Dunbar and Fabian Moreau are both out. So if both of those guys are out, they will have Greg Stroman and Danny Johnson. So Greg Stroman will be lined up against Odell Beckham. Stroman is a seventh round draft pick rookie, and they will have Danny Johnson out of the slot, who's an undrafted free agent rookie. So, I mean, you have a 7th-round rookie and an undrafted free agent rookie. Josh Norman is also on the field, but he hasn't shifted sides this year. He's played primarily on the right side. So they can line Beckham up wherever, and Norman's probably not going to follow. Or they'll go with Shepard out of the slot. The most popular guy will likely be Andy Dalton going up against Tampa Bay. This Tampa Bay defense is it'll be either Dalton or Winston. But both of these past defenses are atrocious. Tampa's allowed 334 to 439 in 5 of the last 6 opponents. And, I mean, Winston, it's that team has so much talent around him that we saw what Mahomes did on Sunday night. So, for me in cash, it's Manning, but you can't really go wrong with Winston or Dalton.
Ryan, would you agree with those picks, or do you have other guys in mind at quarterback?
Yeah, I would. And Devin, the cheap quarterback is sort of John and I's brand. So thanks for joining this week. But you did give compelling reasons this time beyond he doesn't cost a lot of money, which is normally pretty much my entire reason. But I am now like definitely looking to build lineups around Manning. It is compelling. I'll be checking the injuries for that.
It has to be with both of those two out.
Of course.
If either one of those is playing, it's a completely different story.
Yeah, agreed. And if they're not, you made the right case. So it's definitely worth looking at. So I encourage everybody to check our news, check any news you can, and as you should be. I mean, thanks everybody for listening to the show. But if you're not checking things Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, then you're just not doing it right. So make sure that if any news kind of supersedes what we tell you here, use your gut. Check with us on Twitter, all those things, but make sure that you're following, not just blindly going with our Thursday night suggestions without any other research. But moving on to someone else, I agree with Dalton from a cash game perspective. I mean, Tampa's just been horrific. We've covered that. My trend spotting article has covered it. It's old news at this point, so let's just keep hitting that. From a GPP perspective, I really like Jared Goff. Everybody's going to talk about how to jam Todd Gurley into lineups. This team's projected to score, what is it, John, 33 points or more, something like that?
32.8.
So if Todd Gurley rushes for 1 touchdown this week instead of 2 or 3, presumably Goff throws for the others. And so a 3-touchdown game, a 4-touchdown game is not out of the question. The total in this game is very high, but Aaron Rodgers can hold serve with Jared Goff any day of the week. So this game could go even over the high total that it is. There could be 7 combined passing touchdowns in this game. So I'm not overlooking Jared Goff, and I'm not overlooking his targets, especially in LA. We know where they're going, and now they're going to an even more concentrated group of folks with Cooper Kupp likely out, not to spoil the wide receiver news. So I really like Jared Goff and GPPs. If you want to have a lineup with Gurley or even without Gurley, that's a great leverage play.
Yeah, and those receiving targets, I'm assuming you're referring to, are Robert Woods and Brandon Cooks over there with Kupp out. John, tell me, who you like at quarterback? I don't know. It sounds like maybe there's some other guys on this list that are worth mentioning, especially for GPPs.
Yeah, in cash games on DraftKings this week, for me, I think it's Winston. I like Saquon Barkley. We'll talk a little bit about that. But because I like Saquon Barkley as much as I do, I don't know that I can go with Eli Manning, although I will argue at this point in time maybe Saquon Barkley is the number 1 receiving weapon on the Giants because of how much he's being targeted. But I think Jameis Winston's the guy I want to roll with this week. He's 6,000, but DraftKings has priced up their quarterbacks a bit for once. There aren't a whole lot of cheap options that I like. I can get behind the Eli Manning thing, but I just prefer spending up on Winston because of how bad their defense is and the way this game should shoot out. In GPPs and tournament play, I'm looking at a couple guys. I think Aaron Rodgers, I talked about him on the top of the show. Going up against the Rams has been a recipe for success. If you're outside of C.J. Beathard last week, most quarterbacks perform very well against this offense simply because there's garbage time to be had late in the game. And Rodgers is 6,400. It's a bit more than a lot of people want to pay. But as I said, DraftKings has priced up their quarterbacks this week. Dropping down $100, I like Andrew Luck this week. Andrew Luck, he's setting a record right now. If he continues to do what he's doing, he will throw more passes in the history of the NFL in a single season if he continues to throw at the rate at which he's throwing. A lot of people, I think, are going to be chasing Marlon Mack after his 100-yard game last week. He finally is healthy, yada, yada. But this guy's played 17 NFL games and has one 100 game under his belt. And I suspect a lot of people are going to be chasing after him.
And now he's not healthy again. I mean, it doesn't look like he's even going to play this week.
Okay.
So that's more
downgraded.
When I said he was finally healthy again, I meant last week. My apologies.
Yeah.
Misinterpreted. And then in terms of the matchup, Oakland has allowed multiple touchdowns to opposing quarterbacks in every game except for one. That game that they didn't was Case Keenum. So, I think that Andrew Luck getting back T.Y. Hilton, who's 100%, I think, for the first time in a while, things look good for him. And on the other side of that other side of that game, I also like Derek Carr, believe it or not. I think this game could be a back and forth shootout. Both of these offenses are fairly fast. Indianapolis is running the fastest overall offense in the league. And Oakland, as I'm looking at it, is actually not as fast as I thought. In my notes, I had it as different. They're about 20th. But I do think that this is going to be a quick-paced game. We're losing Marshawn Lynch, so the Raiders are going to get away from the run a little bit. And when they do run the ball, Jalen Richard's going to be there, probably catching quite a few passes. So I like this game to be a lot of passing, therefore a lot of plays, therefore a lot of scoring.
So all of those guys in GPP except Winston, or are you playing any of those in cash?
No, all those guys are GPP. The only cash game quarterback I like as of now is Jameis Winston. And, I'm sure I'll pick another one up for my article on Saturday. But as of now, Winston's the only guy I feel comfortable with.
Got it. Let me mention one more that's FanDuel specific. Mitch Trubisky, however you want to pronounce it. If I were to tell you guys he's the number 3 overall fantasy quarterback this year on a fantasy points per game basis, I don't think a lot of people would believe me, but he is. And the Jets secondary has struggled so far this year. The last 4 games, they've allowed opponents to go 300 yards or more. So Trubisky's on fire right now, and it's 7,700 on FanDuel. He's too expensive on DraftKings, I think, but he's about the 10th most expensive quarterback on FanDuel, which is too low. They haven't priced him up accordingly.
Let's move on to running backs. If you want to check out our content, be sure to go over to footballguys.com. Running backs, we've got quite a few injuries here. Only a few of them are sort of DFS relevant, I feel like. I'm keeping an eye on Royce Freeman, who looks like he's not going to play this week, so we might get him out against Kansas City. Marlon Mack looks like he's probably not going to go against Oakland. Peyton Barber got in a limited practice on Thursday, but if he doesn't go, then I think you've got a matchup to exploit there at Cincinnati.
Neither of those guys are good at football, though, right? I mean, Barber and Ronald Jones both.
And Tampa Bay doesn't run the ball a whole lot, but It's Cincinnati with a high over-under. So I think you at least has to be on your radar. I'm not saying like I'm jumping up for joy about it, but
yeah, and sometimes at running back, you don't have to be good at football to be fantasy good.
Yeah.
Look at Latavius Murray.
There you go. Yeah. Perfect example. Let's see. Matt Breida didn't practice on Thursday. Marshawn Lynch is on IR, and Doug Martin is the starter. Bilal Powell is on IR. And it looks like Chris Thompson might come back after a 2-week absence. So let me know if any of those tickle your fancy. Ryan, who are you interested in at running back this week?
Yeah, so John alluded to the number of home favorites in the Vegas segment, and that's kind of for cash at least where we want to start with the safest guys, right? So, but to put a twist on it here, off what I mentioned in the quarterback section with Jared Goff, if you're not going to put Todd Gurley in your lineup, which buyer beware of not doing that, but I guess this is a long way of saying James Conner is viable in all formats. If he's your RB2 with Todd Gurley and you want to go cheap at receiver, go for it. But it looks like there's a little more value at running back this week, at least in my early builds, and the guys maybe have some cheap options that they can mention along that line. But Conner is a solid RB1. You're avoiding Todd Gurley. Cleveland allows over 39% of their points via rushing touchdowns, which is the second most in the NFL. And the Steelers score 28% of their points via rushing touchdowns, which is the 8th highest percentage in the NFL. He's a more than a touchdown home favorite. He gets all the touches. He catches passes. He has 2 straight multi-touchdown games in a row. It could very well be 3 by the end of Sunday. So I really like James Conner this week.
And I mentioned the linebacking issues the Browns are having. On last week's show, Joe Schobert remained out. They weren't able to be exploited last week, but I think that they are. I think Conner is an excellent play this week.
And Devin, you had mentioned trying to get both Gurley and Conner into your cash game lineups. Is that what I was hearing? I think that's the big question, right? When you're trying to do your builds, Like, which of these guys are you going with, and are you willing to pay up for Gurley? I think that's a big question. What do you think?
Yeah. I mean, I think if you're following this show at this point, you know that I don't spend any dollars on defense. I go to whoever the cheapest defense is on the board. And if you go with Eli Manning, you can get both of those guys in your cash lineups pretty, I don't want to say easily, but you're having a couple of mid-tier receivers. I just built one that has a couple $6,000 receivers in there. So it's completely doable. It's probably the route that I'm going to go just because I am comfortable with Manning, assuming those two are out. I can't reiterate it enough.
Right.
But yeah, I don't spend any salary on defense ever. So for me, I'm starting with Connor and Gurley and adding Chris Carson. So Chris Carson's the other cheap guy that I like on both sites. He's 6,300 on FanDuel and 4,300 on DraftKings. This is a guy who I think a lot of people like the New England backfield historically have been scared off of Seattle, but he's had 32, 19, and 14 carries. And I think he would have had more if the game was closer. They pulled him for Rashad Penny last week, but it's a guy who's gone over 100 yards in 2 of his last 3 games. So his price doesn't seem like it's high enough for the matchup. So it's a decent matchup this week. And, you know, going up against Detroit, a lot of people are going to be scared off because of Snacks Harrison. They acquired the defensive tackle from the Giants, and he's a good player, but the defensive line it's an important piece, and I think it takes some cohesion. So I think that it's going to take a week or two for this Lions defense to improve. So at 4,300, I'm pretty much starting with those 3 on DraftKings. On FanDuel, I'm just going with Gurley and Connor in cash.
Yeah, I was going to ask you. I mean, it feels like Gurley's price is a little bit friendlier at DraftKings than it is at FanDuel, but even at that 11,000 price tag, you're finding ways to make it work. John,
I mean, in cash, it's just like you're guaranteed. You feel you have like a little blanket, and you just like, I don't know. I feel very good when I click the button that says Todd Gurley that I'm going to have 20 plus points on both sides.
It's like the guarantee fairy is just leaving money under your pillow.
Yeah.
John, what do you think about Connor versus Gurley, or sort of your cash strategy? We know you're a DraftKings mainly guy. So what is the landscape there for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have some – last week it was pretty easy to get Gurley into your lineups because there was a lot of value at the lower end of the scale, both a wide receiver and running back. And this week – I'm not so sure there's that much value. At the lower end of the scale, I agree with Devin. I think Chris Carson's in play. I think I have him as a borderline cash game play on DraftKings. He's certainly a GPP option. I think who I like better for cash games as far as salary saving is Jalen Richard in Oakland, simply because of the PPR value that you get on DraftKings. This year, Richard, in the first game of the year, caught 9 passes. Third game, he caught 6. Another game 6, another game 7. I mean, that's really valuable. And now he's not going to be giving up anywhere from, say, 14 to 18 touches a game to Marshawn Lynch. So you got to think he steals some of that action, even though Doug Martin should be the lead back. I think Richard gets some additional looks, and he's 4,200. And I kind of think that I'm going to gravitate towards him as far as salary saving. On the high end, there's 3 guys. James Conner, Saquon Barkley, and Todd Gurley. Todd Gurley, if you can jam him into your lineup, I can't argue why you wouldn't. But maybe I'll play devil's advocate here and say that the last 2 weeks, Malcolm Brown has seen a little more action than I would like him to see when I'm paying $10,000 for a running back. Last week it was a blowout game. You can say what you want. I get it. But Brown had 14 touches last week. The week before, he had 5 touches. That's not to say that Gurley isn't getting his points, and that's not to say that Gurley is a bad play, but the opportunity cost is very, very high. And we do know that there are some pretty good skill players at the other positions on this team. You know, Robert Woods he's a decent player, and we already talked about Jared Goff, and of course Brandon Cooks, and so on and so forth. So I'm leaning towards saving $1,000 and going with Saquon Barkley in that Giants-Washington game. Over the past 2 games, Saquon Barkley has 18 catches. I mean, that's in the neighborhood of a top-end wide receiver, and you're adding another 15 touches on the ground. From my perspective, that's the way I want to go, because I know no matter what, he's game script proof, and he is the number one guy in that offense.
I find your lack of faith in Todd Gurley disturbing.
I stopped early because I thought you had something legitimate to say. And
no, I don't have anything legitimate to say.
Wildly overestimating him.
Yes. Devin, what were you going to say?
Don't play Barkley on FanDuel.
You don't like his pricing over there?
Well, no, it has everything to do with the PPR value. So
yes.
he has so much value because he's a receiver. And at half-point PPR, it makes it really tough because he's one of those – he's a running back who will have 0 yards, 0 yards, 0 yards, 0 yards, and you're watching the game and you're banking on a 35, 40-yard run to pop. And if that doesn't pop, we've seen games where he has 3.2, 3.3 yards per carry. So on FanDuel, I think he's too risky for his price.
I agree on that. And, you know, from my perspective, it's just I think Eli Manning's gotten kind of lazy, to be honest. I think Eli Manning is just – he drops back. If nobody's wide open, he's like, here, Saquon, do what you do with it. And he just scrambles off for 5 to 10 yards and ends up with 12 targets. On DraftKings full PPR scoring, I think that's the way you want to go. But I do agree with the assessment on FanDuel.
Let me ask you about a few other guys here that are kind of high on our interactive value charts here. What about, I don't know, what about David Johnson with a new offensive coordinator? Does that interest you at all in GPPs? John's saying kind of yes. The other guys are saying no way. We didn't see a huge improvement last week, but you know, Byron Leftwich didn't have a ton of time to prep as the OC.
Not even the running back I want most in that game.
Fair. Okay, yeah.
Who's the guy? Raheem Mostert?
Yes, if Matt Breida is out, which he should be because the guy has a catastrophic injury every week, he needs to just relax, sit down. I'm spoken like a jaded season-long owner who had him last week and lost because of it. But Arizona's horrible against the run. That he's very good in the pass game, and he led the team in rushing 2 straight weeks, and he's just uber cheap, especially on DraftKings, I believe. And again, another full PPR type special. But Arizona allows the highest percentage of points via rushing touchdowns. I mean, their personnel dictates that they're bad against the run. Their game scripts dictate that they're bad against the run. So I like Mostert better. And the Johnson thing, to me, it's just I got to see it once before.
I mean, you guys did read what Byron Leftwich said today about getting him involved and how he wants to use him in that offense.
Yeah, Hugh Jackson said he wants to get Duke Johnson involved every single.
There aren't many Hugh Jacksons in the NFL. Let's be honest. Let's not even put them in the same category.
Well, we don't know yet, right? So
Mike McCoy was catching a lot of heat and was hearing that as well. So
this offensive line is so terrible that when they pass, they have to keep him in to block.
We'll see. But I want to point out, somebody said earlier that last week it didn't change anything. This is the first week with Byron Leftwich as the offensive.
This will be the first. That's right.
Oh, okay. Yeah. How about Nick Chubb? I know we saw a little bit of that last week. Is this something we want to look closer at? No.
Duke Johnson's the guy in that game.
Yeah, it's a game script thing. I mean, Nick Chubb has like a handful or less of targets in all of his work preseason and regular season. So
I think he only had 10 or 12 total catches in college, something like that. It was a ridiculously low number for a starting running back. And there were a lot of concerns. Can he pass protect? Can he catch the ball, et cetera? I think this is the week where the Duke has 7 or 8 catch potential. But
gotcha.
I mean, for me, it's Mostert, Duke, and then Jalen Richard. But
I would agree. The one thing with Jalen Richard is, he has caught 9, 6, 6, and 7 passes in 4 games this year. In all those games, Oakland has lost by more than a touchdown. So if we really trust Indy, I know they're favored by 3, though. It's a short road favorite. If we trust Indy to blow Oakland out, fine. I'm on board with Richard, but I don't know that I can take that leap of faith with the other cheap guys available. And real quick before we move on, have we ever gone this long without talking about a player that scored 3 touchdowns last week? I know that high end of the spectrum we talked about
Todd Gurley.
Kareem Hunt scored 3 touchdowns last week.
I'm aware.
Yeah.
And Kareem Hunt is facing Denver, who is horrible against the run. Shout out to Austin here, because in my trend spotting column this week, I compared teams from a defense versus position perspective compared to their normalized strength of schedule perspective. And Denver's horrible at both. They're actually 26th against running backs on a raw perspective and 30th on a normalized perspective. So they're not good against the run. It's another home favorite. So GPP lineups, I mean, there are better options in cash, safer options perhaps. KC can score their points in any number of ways. But this is a guy who could score multiple touchdowns as a heavy home favorite.
I'm fine with that.
And we're not looking really at Isaiah Crowell with Powell out because of Chicago's defense. And we're not really looking too hard at Phillip Lindsay against Kansas City because they're such underdogs in that game. Are those fair statements, or does anyone disagree with that?
I think if Freeman misses, Lindsay's in play.
Yeah. Okay.
He's a good enough receiver. He can catch 4, 5, 6 balls, and that's all you're really looking for.
Okay, cool. Maybe that's more of a DraftKings thing with the full PPR then. All right, let's move on to wide receivers. Not as much news on the wide receiver front. We've got the Green Bay receivers looking likely to return after the bye week. Randall Cobb and Geronimo Allison look like they're going to play. Pierre Garçon looks like he's not going to play this week at Arizona. And then Paul Richardson looks like he's going to come back this week, although Jamison Crowder's probably still out. And then Amari Cooper got traded to Dallas. Now Dallas is on the bye, but we should at least mention whether we care about how that impacts the other Oakland receivers in this game against Indy. John, tell me about who you like at receiver this week.
It's an interesting week at wide receiver because typically we have these expensive guys like Michael Thomas or Antonio Brown, Adam Thielen. These guys are, the how you want to anchor your cash game lineups. And I think 2 of those guys aren't on the main slate. And then Antonio Brown is so expensive, and you have the kind of the uprise of Juju. It doesn't really make him a lock and load. And so when I built my first cash game lineup, I was kind of going middle of the road at this position. I already told you I went with Winston, and I told you the running backs I liked and getting some value with Richard. So I was going middle of the road with wide receivers, looking at guys like Robert Woods at 6,800. T.Y. Hilton, I think, is going to get a lot more looks this week than he did last week. He only played about 50% of the snaps, scored 2 touchdowns, mind you, but he's 6,300. And then I think probably one of my favorite plays of the week is Emmanuel Sanders at 6,500 against the Chiefs. These guys, all in those 6,000 range, those are, I think, where I want to go with cash games. With GPPs, I got a few favorites. Maybe I'll sprinkle one in right now, and I'll save some for later. I think if, the guy that'll go overlooked is Cortland Sutton at 3,800. In that same game, you can expect Case Keenum to probably throw the ball 35 to 40 times. He'll be looking for Emmanuel Sanders, but Sutton is actually out-snapping Demaryius Thomas at this point, and he's shown a lot of promise, and he's offered up at about 40% discount from those other 2 guys. So I like him as a salary saver with touchdown upside.
Devin, who you got at wide receiver this week?
Yeah, so I mentioned Odell Beckham, and he's the guy that I'm trying to fit in, and I just built a lineup with James Conner, Todd Gurley, and Odell Beckham, and Eli Manning on DraftKings, and I'm going to be rolling that one out in cash. I think. Assuming I keep reiterating, assuming those guys are out, the corners are out, but whenever you can get a guy like Odell Beckham for 7,500 on DraftKings, I think he's a little too expensive on FanDuel, but
yeah,
we saw him break out on Monday night, and I keep talking about this every week. But these guys that break out on Monday night, I like to target because the sites already have the pricing done, and they don't have time to actually update them. So going up against either a 7th round or an undrafted rookie, sign me up.
Sounds good.
Jordy Nelson on FanDuel is 5,300, which is laughable. So Nelson has had his ups and downs this year, and he's a little bit risky, but at 5,300, he's simply too cheap for a guy who, I mean, the Colts defense has allowed the opponents to complete 72% of passes this year. So 72% of the passes this year have been completed against the Colts. And Jordy at 5,300, I know there's other guys that other people will like. And at FanDuel or on DraftKings at 47, I can't do it because of the price. But at 53, he's their best red zone threat. So he might be cash viable for me. I run a blog where I post my cash game site every week, and I'll post it in the comments section and check it there. But he might make it this week.
Nice, Ryan. Who you like at receiver?
Yeah, so just 3 real quick that are probably okay in any format. Devontae Adams for Green Bay. You know, John kind of alluded to a lot of the stud receivers being either off the slate or out of play. Did not mention Devontae Adams, who is a stud receiver who is very much in play in the highest total game of the week. Tyler Boyd. Tampa Bay is horrible at pretty much everything related to defending the pass, but they're really bad with guys that play in the slot, and Tyler Boyd does that predominantly. And also Robert Woods. I alluded earlier to, I guess it's Rams week for me, but not Todd Gurley. But I alluded earlier to the concentrated distribution of targets without Cooper Kupp. I mean, it's pretty concentrated with Cooper Kupp. It's even more so without. So, you know, last week we talked about Josh Reynolds filling in for Cooper Kupp and being the sacrificial lamb to Richard Sherman. Richard Sherman didn't play, and Josh Reynolds had, I think, 1 target or 1 catch.
I told you guys, never Josh Reynolds.
Yeah, he did nothing, and good for you. That was correct.
Did we tout Josh Reynolds last week? I don't remember touting him.
We mentioned him at the beginning.
I
said we're not entertaining that conversation.
Before we could tout him, Devin told us not to.
All right.
So we have a distribution of targets that's very narrow on a team that's really good. So I like Robert Woods. He's a little safer probably than Brandon Cooks, but I really don't mind Brandon Cooks either. So Adams, Boyd, and Woods, I think, you know, pretty much all the way around in any kind of format are viable plays.
Now, the Jets receiving core, I mean, the Jets in general are just a mess, but the receiving core especially, they've got Anunwa is already ruled out. Robbie Anderson is likely out. Terrell Pryor was released, and they signed Rashard Matthews on Tuesday. Is there any GPP interest in the Jets pass catchers at all? No one's got it. That's fine. I just wanted to be sure, just because there's a lot of injuries here and people might wonder.
I can't do it.
Yeah, I know. Can't pull the trigger.
Maybe if you want to go bottom of the barrel at tight end, Jeremy Herndon's 2,700 on DraftKings if you want to punt that position for GPPs. He scored a touchdown last week. Maybe that's, you get something in garbage time. At 2,700, you really can't go wrong. But I would advise people to stay away. Last week, Jermaine Kearse had an excellent matchup and just fell off the face of the earth. Didn't even get a target, for crying out loud. So if you can't do it in a great matchup without some of those players, you can't go back there this week.
Yeah. All right, guys, let's move on to tight ends. The only note I have on tight ends is –
Are there any – Sorry to interrupt. We've talked about Tampa and Cincinnati. We didn't mention a single Tampa receiver.
Chris
Mike
Godwin.
Evans had a – go ahead.
I like Chris Godwin this week. He's taking over in terms of snaps for Deshaun Jackson. Look at the snap counts over the past few weeks. He's finally taking him over in terms of snap count. The guy continues to get anywhere from 5 to 8 looks a week. And then this is a game where they're likely playing from behind on the road. We know how bad their defense is. If I'm Cincinnati, I'm keying on Mike Evans for all the reasons you're about to say. And I really think that Chris Godwin is an excellent receiver who's starting to come into his own, and he's only 4,500 on DraftKings.
No, I just wanted to mention that I was the only one that maybe in the industry that thought Denzel Ward would shadow Deshaun Jackson. And now we can move on to tight ends.
Well, okay, last question. It looks like Allen Robinson is unlikely to play this week. Is there any interest in Taylor Gabriel? I'm looking around for some other guys we didn't mention.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Definitely.
Okay.
Every week, Taylor Gabriel.
Okay. I figured, but we didn't mention him, so I'm kind of scraping around here. All right, let's talk tight ends.
If Robinson doesn't play, I think that Anthony Miller is a decent GPP target. And the reason I said
your player.
I do the Bears write-up for Football Guys. So Miller had 7 targets last week, and including a deep shot that was a horribly underthrown ball by Trubisky. So I think that they're trying to integrate him more into this offense, and I'm sure he's bottom of the barrel priced.
3,400 DraftKings, 5,200 FanDuel.
Without question, he's got the best personnel matchup against Perry Nickerson, who I think is bottom 3 on Pro Football Focus in terms of coverage this season.
John, does that apply if Robinson is out? Is that what you're saying?
Yes. If Robinson's out, I think Miller becomes a top-notch GPP play. I think he's still in play based on the salaries that you referenced, but I wouldn't be as excited about him if Robinson's active.
Nice.
I think he's cash viable if Robinson's out.
Yeah. And to the point that Devin made earlier, he's someone that they seem to want to get involved early in the season. When he got hurt is really when Taylor Gabriel took off. So they could start spreading that around, particularly if Robinson is out. Both guys become good targets.
Right on. All right, tight ends. The only guy I'm really keeping my eye on is Jack Doyle. There's talk that he might return this week, although they have a week 9 bye, so I don't think I'm buying it. I think that Doyle likely sits, even though he's gotten in limited practices this week. So just keep an eye on that if you're thinking about playing Eric Ebron. He's not, Doyle's not really fantasy viable, but it could impact whether you want to play Ebron or not. Ryan, I'm going to go to you first on tight ends. Who do you like this week?
I'm going back to, well, it's going to be hard to fit him in, I will say, but I really like David Njoku again this week. The Steelers have allowed 5 or more catches to 5 tight ends this season in 6 games. They allow 7.7 receptions per game to tight ends, which is the most in the NFL, 79.7 yards per game, 3rd most in the NFL. They've been torched, and they have not really even played a good tight end. They've played 2 tight ends over 3,000 salary on DraftKings for that week. Those players averaged 6.5 catches, 90 yards, and combined for 2 touchdowns. So 6.5, 90, and a touchdown. That includes Travis Kelce, and that includes, who else was it? O.J. Howard are the guys that were over 3,000. And O.J. Howard was splitting time that week, and Cameron Brate scored a touchdown as well. So they are horrible against the position. And Cleveland should be throwing a lot if you believe the point spread and game script. So I'd like to get Njoku in if I can. I know I've mentioned a lot of high-priced players this week.
On FanDuel, he's plug and play.
Yeah, he's somebody I'm starting with.
Nice. Devin, you're saying he's plug and play cash and GPPs?
Anywhere.
Yeah, just
at 5,700, he's still too cheap. They haven't raised his price up enough. So we've talked about how the Browns going to move the ball, right? So they're not going to run the ball with Chubb because they're going to be losing. They could throw to Duke Johnson, maybe. And Jarvis Landry has a tough matchup. What's the slot corner? Mike Hilton.
Yep, Mike Hilton.
Yeah. So he has the toughest matchup of anyone on the team. So I really think it's Njoku gets a lot of garbage time this week. Outside of that, this is a weird week. CJ Uzomah is going to be popular because it's a high throwing game, but I don't trust CJ Uzomah. Jordan Reed is probably a guy who at some point is going to break out. And
you say that every week.
Right, but he's going up against the Giants and he's going to go up against Alec Ogletree. And
I agree.
And we've talked about Alec Ogletree in the past about how he just can't guard tight ends. You've written up trend spotting for how many consecutive weeks last year about the Giants. So Reed is a GPP play for me. I can't do it in cash, but on FanDuel he's 5,800, which is too cheap.
John, I want to put you on the spot here a little bit about Eli Apple going away from the Giants. Getting traded.
Webb.
What's that?
BW Webb.
BW Webb, and I was going to
John's
say,
favorite player.
whose matchup does that influence in this game, and do we care about that?
You know, the most talented defensive back on that team is Janoris Jenkins, and he's actually got the worst stats out of all of them. So it's a really tough call. I mean, Eli Apple, I think, was holding it together. He had a terrible 2017 campaign.
Right.
Came back this year and really lit it up. I just think he was a bad clubhouse guy, which is why they got rid of him. The thing is, there hasn't been a wide receiver in Washington who's done anything all season. You're looking at names like Josh Doxson. Brian Quick might get a start this week. Maurice Harris. I mean, are we really banking on this? This is why I loved for the past 2 weeks. I don't think anybody's been a stronger proponent of Josh Reed than myself.
Jordan Reed.
Sorry. Then
take a drink if you're listening.
Water tonight too. So
he didn't mispronounce it. He just got the name wrong.
In fairness, it's almost 10 o'clock. This is like an hour and a half past my bedtime.
So old.
Hashtag so old.
But I'm serious. I'm starting to wonder whether or not Jordan Reed is just all the injuries starting to build up, and whether or not he's the same player. Because there's no reason this guy shouldn't have performed over the past few weeks against Dallas and Carolina and New Orleans, excuse me. I'm really concerned about Jordan Reed. I don't like anything about this Washington offense outside of Adrian Peterson this week.
Devin held up his red black-eyed Joe with a bite taken out of it. What do you have to say there?
Yeah, my pet took a bite out of it. My dog ate my homework. Paul Richardson, if he plays, going up against slot corner Grant Haley, who's taken 4 total snaps this year. Undrafted.
That's about as many as Richardson's taken.
It's fair.
Yeah.
Undrafted rookie out of Penn State. So if you're looking to exploit somebody, it could be Richardson out of the slot.
I don't know. Can't we do better than this game to exploit anybody?
Yeah. Maybe we're barking at the wrong game. I just had to bring it up.
As a GPP play, why not?
Yeah. So for tight ends, I haven't said anybody yet. I agree. I think Uzomah is a guy at 3,500 on DraftKings you can go for. Tampa Bay, I think, last I checked, were allowing the most fantasy points per game to the position. So there's no reason not to go that way, especially because he's going to be at least, I think he's half price from Tyler Boyd, and maybe even a third of the price of or thereabouts of AJ Green. If you want to spend up, Jared Cook's probably the answer. He's going to be the guy in Oakland in terms of passing catches this week with Amari Cooper gone. I know we talked about Jordy Nelson earlier, but I have some concern that Jordy Nelson is not going to be able to perform as well as he has been performing this year with Amari Cooper being gone, and now the number one coverage guy on the opposite side is going to go after Jordy Nelson. I think he's lost a step, which is why the Packers let him go in the offseason. So I think that helps Jared Cook. And then outside of that, maybe if you want to punt, can you go for the tight end there in Denver? We know I can't pronounce names.
Heuerman.
You guys do
Jeff
it?
Heuerman.
Jeff Heuerman, 2,600. He's the guy that, yes, I did know he was from Ohio State. I can say that. If you want to punt the position for cash games, I don't hate it at 2,600. You know that Case Keenum's going to throw the ball again 35, 45 times. If he catches 3 for 30, you're doing okay. If he gets into the end zone in garbage time, you definitely have reached value. So I don't hate that, especially if you want to jam those guys like Gurley and Saquon into your lineups. That's the way to do it.
Yep. Before Austin got away from the segment, I was going to interject and mention Heuerman. So we've mentioned Tampa, who's given up the most yardage to tight ends, the Steelers, who have given up the third most, and KC's right there in the middle. They've given up 80.4 yards a game to tight ends. They're the second highest number in the league.
Awesome. Let's talk about defenses. Devin, I'm going to send this one to you first. Which defenses do you like this week? Which Ironmen of the gridiron are you going after?
Yeah, DraftKings is too easy. It's Pittsburgh Steelers. 2,300. It's. I'm never going to mention a defense that is expensive. I've said this numerous times. On FanDuel, it's easy as well. It's Arizona at 3,400. You could also, if you have 400 extra, you could pay up to Pittsburgh. But it's pretty easy this week.
Nice. Ryan, Steelers fan. Do you agree with that pick, or you got somebody else?
Oh, I 100% agree with that one, especially for cash games. It's cheap. It's a team that sacks the quarterback a lot versus a team that gets sacked a lot in a game script that suggests the sacking team should do a lot of sacking. But besides that, GPP play, Kansas City Chiefs. It's a horrible defense on paper. They're a home favorite.
I like it.
They're going to be rushing the passer quite a bit because presumably their offense will get them a big lead like they always do. I don't see Denver keeping pace. Case Keenum is the opposing quarterback. He likes to throw interceptions. Well, maybe he doesn't like it, but he does. And maybe Tyreek Hill even returns a kick, and you get a high ceiling, potential bonus there. So don't sleep on KC. A lot of people will.
I wish Justin Houston is playing, but
if Justin Houston is playing, you said
it would help.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, John seemed to like that pick. Devin made a face like I don't think so. John,
sounds about right.
Yeah, that's pretty normal when Ryan's talking. John, what do you like at defense this week?
I led off the show talking about all the high-scoring teams in Vegas. So by virtue of that, there's not a whole lot of defenses that we should like. I do agree with the consensus here. I think the Steelers are the defense I want to roll with in cash games on DraftKings. 2,300 is too cheap, especially when we talk about Baker Mayfield and how he's kind of been beaten up there in terms of sacks and so forth. So I think they're giving up or allowing themselves, or whatever the word is, 4.4 sacks per game this season. So there's no reason to get away from the Steelers at that basement bargain price. But don't look too far past the Arizona Cardinals and San Francisco 49ers are playing one another. You can punt with either one of those defenses in GPPs. You got two young quarterbacks who haven't done anything all season. And in terms of fantasy points allowed against the team defense, those guys rank number 2 and number 3 behind only Buffalo. So I think you could do worse than just punting with them as well.
Baltimore's too cheap for how talented they are too.
Yeah, that was one I had.
The best defense in the league, and they're what, 2,800 on DraftKings, and I think 3,700 on FanDuel. The FanDuel price is almost absurd, but I mean, it's the best defense in the league. I understand they're on the road going up against Cam Newton, but Newton has shown a tendency to throw picks throughout his career. So if you're into hey, I'm just going to bet on talent, it's not a bad option.
Yep, that was my FanDuel pick. I like that.
Real quick.
Chicago's the team if you really want just a guaranteed, 10 points from your defense, but you're sacrificing so much.
Yeah, it's a lot of cash.
Real quick for our folks that request FanDuel specific plays. Am I seeing it right that Arizona is 3,200 on DraftKings, the second highest price? So maybe not them there, but if you're going to play Arizona, it's probably FanDuel, not
Yes.
DraftKings.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
That's too much. That's too much there.
Yes, I agree completely.
To Devin's point, Baltimore's 400 cheaper. The Steelers are 900 cheaper. So
yeah, I mean, for me, as I mentioned at the start, it's Steelers in cash on DraftKings and the Cardinals on FanDuel.
To be clear, though, I think in GPPs, that's what I was talking about for those guys. For cash, it's Steelers. But in GPPs, I sometimes pay up a defense just to be contrarian because some people are like Devin and they don't want to pay up for a defense, and understandably so. But in tournament play, sometimes it makes sense to try to just gain an edge on the field, pay a bit more, and that might be where you want to do that.
Sometimes in GPPs, I like to click a random defense and hope they score a touchdown.
On that note, let's move stacks. All right, John, tell me, who are you stacking this week?
I really like this game in Oakland's Indianapolis. Andrew Luck I talked about. I like stacking him in some of my early lineup making with Seth Roberts running out of the slot. He's only 3,400. You can have this stack for less than $10,000. If you saw, look on Twitter, look for the pass chart of Derek Carr this season. It's like 3 yards. Every one of his passes is 3 yards, 4 yards, 5 yards. There's very, very little more than 10 yards. And these are the types of routes that Seth Roberts runs. I think he's going to see a lot of volume this week. He's traditionally been a decent red zone option. He's going to get additional looks because Marshawn Lynch is gone. He's going to get additional looks because Amari Cooper's gone. I've already talked about how I think that affects Jordy Nelson. And when he get inside the red zone, he's got a 5-inch height advantage over Nate Hairston, or Kenny Moore, excuse me. And I think that really bodes well for him. I think he gets in the end zone this week. I think he gets 4x value. And I've already talked about how much I like Andrew Luck. So that's one I like quite a bit. You can run it back with T.Y. Hilton. And then I'll give you one more. I'm not going to give you the reasons. I think they're self-explanatory. But if you love Todd Gurley, there's no reason not to run that back with like Aaron Rodgers and Jimmy Graham at 4,700.
Devin, who you stacking?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've mentioned it about 19 times on this show. It's Eli Manning. Eli Manning and Odell Beckham for me.
Yeah. John's the Odell Beckham whisperer, though. Like, does he kind of okay with this?
It was a long time
okay
ago.
with it, but I don't feel as strongly about it as he does.
Got it. Okay. That was a long time ago.
Who's your backup, Devin, in case one or both of those Washington corners do play?
Yeah, so let's go with – I like Trubisky and Anthony Miller. And the last one I will throw out is – gosh, you guys are putting me on the spot here.
Devin has so many on his list that he can't.
Ben Roethlisberger and Juju Smith-Schuster.
I was wondering if someone might mention Roethlisberger. We hadn't mentioned him.
We haven't mentioned him. I think that, we mentioned that Antonio Brown gets Denzel Ward, which is a tough matchup. I think that Juju going up against Demarius Randall, who they moved from safety down to corner, should be in a good spot this week. So I don't know. It's weird. I don't know if a lot of people will have Roethlisberger coming off the bye. I think people tend to forget about teams coming off the bye for some reason.
I think they'll also look at the top implied team totals, and Pittsburgh is, a few spots down that list, and people will sort of pick more players from some of those higher scoring games.
I like Case Keenum and Emmanuel Sanders too.
Ooh.
I like Emmanuel.
Garbage time.
Ben Roethlisberger is currently Buzzard's 5th most rostered quarterback on draft.
Wow.
So that gives you an idea of where he's at.
I feel like this is the longest we've ever gone on a show without mentioning Ben Roethlisberger when he's not playing on the road or at 1 o'clock. I mean, if he's at home, we usually talk about him, right? I mean, this is a big blow-up spot for him. So
yeah, exactly.
It's surprising to hear that he's 5th. But I guess 5th can still be unique enough.
Yeah.
All right, so I suppose it's my turn now that I just took the mic anyways, right, Austin?
Do it.
So I've alluded throughout the show to the anti-Gurley Rams stacks. So Jared Goff, Robert Woods, and/or Brandon Cooks, run it back with Devontae Adams. And then the rest of your lineup's going to be something you don't want to look at, but that's what GPPs are all about because those guys are all really expensive.
Don't watch the game either, because when Gurley scores 2 touchdowns, you'll be crying.
Sure, of course. Hopefully Goff throws him 1 and then throws 2 others to Robert Woods, and you'll be okay. Let's look at Cincinnati. Take the cheap pieces there. Take Andy Dalton, Tyler Boyd, CJ Uzomah. And then, for cash, Eli Manning and Odell Beckham I had written down.
Let's go.
So I suppose we have to agree with Devin, which is very weird.
My arguments worked.
It's a Halloween show. It's very odd because Devin didn't disagree with me, and it's in, and it only happened once.
Yeah,
Spooky.
It's spooky. All right, let's go with parting thoughts. Hey, Devin, can you tell us how the hashtag Win Devin's Money contest works? We've already selected the competitors. How is this going to work?
Yeah, so there's 10 people we selected. If you want to check my Twitter, if you think you might have been selected, I've sent notes to everybody. And Ohio State 241 at Twitter. And basically, if you beat all 4 of us, so all 4 of our contests, you'll have $50 sent to you via PayPal or check or however you want it sent, courtesy of me. So just want to throw that out there that I am funding this. And
that's why it's called Win Devin's Money.
You guys should be nice to me.
This isn't just a generic hashtag ploy. It really is Devin's Money, guys.
It's really a plea for you guys to like me. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, so if you guys beat me, then
beat all 4 of us.
Beat all 4 of us, correct? And you'll have $50 sent to you. So with that, parting thoughts. I did not mention Adrian Peterson, and I should have. he will run for 100 yards this week.
Chris Thompson might be back, even if he's back.
Without Snacks Harrison, I think that defense is going to be demoralized on the defensive line.
Gotcha. I just like saying Snacks. Ryan, what are your parting thoughts?
I have nothing to promote or no other players to talk about, but I do want to give a special shout out to Tim Hester, who nobody here knows, but the name might sound familiar. It's my younger brother, supporter of the show, avid fantasy football player, who is getting married 2 days now. So very excited. We have a fun outing, a fun weekend planned, and a wedding on Saturday. And I'm glad that I get to talk to all of our fans here on camera, because I'm going to be giving in front of 100 or so people. So ideally, I'm not too nervous to speak publicly, but I'm very excited to do it. So special shout out to my brother Tim and his wife to be Megan. Good luck.
That's fantastic. All of our good thoughts are headed to your brother's way and his fiance.
Make sure you set your lineup on Sunday.
Yes.
I might set mine tomorrow, just because who knows what Sunday is going to be like after the wedding.
All right. John Lee Obi-Wan, you're my only hope for bringing home this parting thoughts segment. What do you got for me?
What is wrong with you, man? What is wrong with you?
It's a spooky Halloween episode.
I don't have I don't have anything. I don't even know how the heck to respond to any of this. It's past my bedtime. If you want me to make a dummy lineup so that you can beat me, send me $45 of Devin's 50 and we'll talk. Have a great week.
Nice. It's not hashtag win Devin's money. It's hashtag give away Devin's money. Oh my gosh. All right. Thank you all for listening and watching for our latest DFS content. Check out footballguys.com. I hope you have a fantastic Halloween, or if you're going to a wedding, I hope you have a fantastic party this weekend. We'll be back next Friday for our Week 9 episode. On behalf of John Lee, Devin Knotts, and Ryan Hester, I'm Austin Lee, saying thank you for watching and thanks for being a football guy. To check out our content at footballguys.com, click the button on Devin's face. To subscribe to our YouTube channel, be sure to click on the button on John's face. And if you'd like to see our latest video, click on the giant video in front of Ryan's face. Click any of those now. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening.